and we thank them for allowing us to live, work, and play in this beautiful part of the world. But I think we are all very sad in our hearts for the actions and activities that have occurred in Tumbler Ridge. So the board will be sending, and I'm going to read it because I can't paraphrase it, and I've already had a heavy enough day with this, that we wish to express our profound sadness upon learning of the tragic events of Tumbler Ridge Secondary School in the South Peace School District. Our hearts are with the students, staff, families, and the entire Tumbler Ridge community during this deeply distressing time. No community should ever have to endure such an event, and we will hold you in our hearts as you support one another in the days and weeks ahead. We would also extend our respect and appreciation to your educators, district leaders, first responders, and support teams who are working tirelessly to ensure safety and care for all those affected. Please know that you have the solidarity and support of colleagues across the province, and we stand in sorrow and in hopes for your healing. And we will send that to Chad Anderson, chair of the board, tomorrow. So, Mr. Amos, first of our public board meetings, and I'll let you start us off.
Thank you, Chair Flynn. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I'm going to share my screen so that folks can follow along. As indicated, the PowerPoint presentation itself will be up on our website as well as the recording itself, so people can, if they've missed today's content, they can follow along at a time that's convenient. So striking in, hopefully you can see the share screen already. So again, welcome everyone for the 26-27 budget information. This is the public budget session. We'll go over some how we got here, as it were, when it comes to the 25-26 amended budget. We'll share out the historical of how we created the 25-26 annual budget. We'll sort of delve into some of the background information, some of the financial enrollment and staffing data, and then we look ahead in terms of some of the planning considerations that senior leaders are considering, followed by a wrap up that just goes into the next steps in the cycle. So ultimately, we start with what makes a better budget. So a better budget starts with aligning our strategic plan so that it reflects our long-term priorities, the board's strategic plan, and shows up in our multi-year financial plan, which is available on our website. It also depends on transparency and accessibility, public meetings, published documents, and presentations that make the process open and understandable. We expect inclusive, realistic engagement so stakeholders can participate meaningfully and talk honestly about needs and trade-offs. On a technical side, we practice comprehensive budget accounting. Again, what used to be GAAP, generally acceptable accounting principles, aligned to prescribed standards so our budget connects cleanly to our audited financial statements. We build in performance reviews and value for money checks because as stewards of taxpayer dollars, program reviews, priority reviews, and ongoing evaluations are part of the cycle. We also scan financial risks and program sustainability, so decisions consider both what we know and what we don't. Quality and integrity require independent audit and compliance with legislative and ministerial regulations. Finally, we integrate capital planning, budgeting, not just operating and special purpose funds, so that we understand the cost and funding mechanisms for projects, utilizing some of the minor capital project money, the major capital, and any other capital funding that might be available to us. Although that's how we ensure budgets are, that way it ensures the budgets are strategic, transparent, accountable, and sustainable. So going into the budget cycle, and I'll just add that if there's any, I think hopefully our moderator, Chair Flynn, can see if there's any hands up so that the flow is kind of regulated, but that's not to say that while we're on a one of the slides that we can answer a question as it comes up. So the budget cycle begins in January with enrollment projections for the next school year and concurrent multi-year planning. We run public and partner information sessions as we are today. We had an earlier to this, we had our partner sessions. Last week, we engaged in the board. We engaged in our administrative team, including our principals and vice principals that keep the process open and transparent. The key milestone is March, when the grant announcement provides revenue details. That lets us balance and finalize the annual budget, which must be adopted by June. Proceeding along to September, we open the school year, confirm actual enrollment, and make any necessary adjustments to staffing, recognizing that there might be additional funding to make these adjustments. That rolls into the amended budget process. In this, I'll catch that. Into the amended budget, which must be approved by February. Often earlier this year, we did it in January. In practice, we always work in two overlapping years, the planning of next year while completing the current one. This cycle of planning, confirming, adjusting, and amending helps us match resources to students and needs as accurately as possible. Moving forward. So starting off in the 25-26 planning year. So last year, the planning of obviously in 25-26, we identified about a $2.49 million gap. The largest driver was about $1.6 million in lost revenues before cost escalations, primarily due to anticipated enrollment decline and lower rental income after facility closures were allowed, that allowed us to reduce risk and liability. We also had cost escalations that we had to embed. Benefits, replacement costs rose. We added cybersecurity district-wide, and we faced unfunded facilities disposition and carrying costs tied to non-educational sites that were being closed or repurposed. To support schools, we added back roughly $200,000 to school district accounts. That allowed schools to add value to their school supply accounts. This combined brought the gap to 2.5. When we addressed it, which we addressed primarily through staffing adjustments while maintaining what we could in core services, focusing on sustainability of the fiscal responsibility that we have and risk management. The key takeaway clearly was revenue softness, declines from enrollment and rentals, plus unavoidable cost pressures, benefits, replacements, cybersecurity, facilities that are ongoing as we build our budgets. Creating a sizable shortfall that had to be closed responsibly. Getting distracted by letting people in.
No, I got it. I can.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Okay.
No worries.
Moving on then.
Yep.
So that was the gap. How we addressed it was we opened the discussion in March, April, when we understood the gap. We presented staffing measures to balance that gap. Specifically, we proposed reducing 11 teaching FTEs and 7 support staff. Within normal operating, an additional 2 support staff were removed due to facility closures attached to those facility rentals, bringing the total support adjustment of 9. We also reduced administration by 3.0 FTE, effectively 23 FTE reduced. These recommendations were shared publicly and deliberated by the board through the spring. The board adopted the budget in May, and we opened the year with these staffing levels in place. While staffing is always our last resort, it actually represents the largest share of our spending, and so therefore it's often what we need to do to achieve a balanced budget at this scale without undermining fiscal integrity. We've been dipping into our surpluses too much over the last number of years. So it's not an approach that we have at our disposal these days. So we need to actually address it through sometimes aggressive staffing reductions. We work to protect classroom delivery and critical supports while aligning to the declining enrollment and ancillary non-grant revenues. Clearly, the objective was sustainable staffing complement that meets students where they are and preserve financial stability. Moving on.
No question.
No question so far. I'm sure
Yep.
they'll come.
They will.
So looking ahead with the financial enrollment and staffing data, the next slide is really indicative of recognizing how grants align to the enrollment that we're seeing. Sorry, skipping ahead of here. I think I skipped one. Right. So the bar graphs are the operating grants. The line graph is the enrollments. And so you can see that generally speaking, the blue, which is the operating grants, align to our enrollment. So over the course of time, the blue bar has increased. Over top of that, you can see the red for other ministry grants and the green for special purpose grants. Oftentimes that red area has been increasing at times as the bargained increases or the increases for salary and benefits has come to us as special ministry grants, and they show up in that red area. And so what you tend to see is at the beginning of a bargained cycle, the red bar is thicker on account of them giving those funds mid-year. They're not rolled into the operating grant. They're not rolled into the per pupil funding. And then once they get rolled into the per pupil funding, then they're integrated into the blue section. And then you'll see the red bar diminish as those show up later. Likewise, the green bar is the special purpose section. It includes learning improvement funds, community and enrichment funds. It includes early learning funding, French funding, that sort of thing. They come as restricted, and therefore they come with a prescribed area that they have to be spent on. Again, revenues generally tracked to student FTE. The grants are tied to the programs for alternate program, online learning, and then our regular bricks and mortar programming. Embedded in that blue are the supplemental factors, such as unique student needs and unique geographic factors, which come with additional funding beyond the student FTE count. And likewise, the special purpose are sit alongside the operating and fluctuate with provincial program priorities. Again, the central message here is just that enrollment is a primary driver of operating funding, and its variability requires cautious planning for students, staffing, facilities, and the supports. When enrollments decline, operating grants tighten. When special purposes funding grows, they may be restricted and therefore limiting the flexibility that we have to cover other essential supports. They tend to cover staffing. They tend to cover, and again, I'm speaking to the special purpose funds. They tend to cover staffing. They tend to cover benefits. But the takeaway is that they don't generally cover some of the auxiliary services that we have to provide to accommodate running of schools. They don't cover custodial. They don't cover the additional maintenance costs. They don't cover administrative burden that comes with running the school districts with these new programs. So again, we value the monies coming to us for these priority programs, but they sometimes restrict what we can do with the funding and therefore pressure the operating fund itself.
No hands, onward.
Onward. So a couple of pie charts you're going to see. You're going to see ones reflecting where the revenues come from, and then two slide decks on how we spend those funds. So comparing 2016 and 2017 to 25-26, we've become more reliant on government funding, operating grants, unique needs and geographic supplements, other ministry grants, and special purpose. When we combine that, you can see that other sources of revenues have declined. So our ISP, our International Student Program, our rentals, and our investments have declined over that corresponding time frame. And it just means that we've got more pressures because we're more aligned to the government grants than we are to additional servicing by these other revenue streams. This shift creates a bit of a structural tension. The restricted funds paid for program staffing don't always include, as I mentioned, these ancillary operating costs, custodial facilities operating and maintenance needed to run schools. The alignment of provincial priorities does help, clearly. We all have an interest in feeding future funds. We all have an interest in early learning programming. We all have an interest in expanding some of the transportation needs of First Nations. But they don't always come with these ancillary costs, so the burden is much more felt. The flexibility shrinks in terms of our operating grant, and the pressures continue to grow.
Onward.
Onward. So getting into how they're spent. So when it comes to presenting the budgets in the formats for financial presentation or financial statement presentations and budgets, we talk about by function, which is attributing the costs against transportation and housing. This is your busing. This is a busing administration, operations and maintenance. This includes the trades that are obviously maintaining the programs, the custodials, and the operations and maintenance. Utility costs come out of that area. District administration includes the function of the board. It includes the function of the superintendent's office, and includes the function of the business office, which is secretary, treasurer, and human resources. And then instruction is everything else. And so instruction, as you can see, includes our classroom instruction, the counseling, the library services, the inclusive education, Indigenous education. So you can see between the 2 years, the 2 years presented, our instruction spend, if we include special purpose funds in that instruction component, it's gone from 83% on instruction to 81% on instruction. And again, this is recognizing that there is additional cost burden on the other areas. So spending by function is anchored by instruction, which includes those areas that I've talked about. Many special purpose also support instructional programming. And that's the core, but that's not to say that that's all that we do within the school district. So the takeaway is that while instruction remains the core, the support systems sometimes lag behind in terms of how they are funded. As more funding is tied to targeted programming staffs, we have to sort of delve into the underlying infrastructure and operations and make some concessions sometimes when it comes to the instructional component that we have. So looking at it by object, you can see that it's generally broken down by staffing, benefits, and supplies and services. And that staffing component is broken down by teachers, principals and vice principals, educational assistants and support staff are the our CUPE in terms of a bargaining unit. Teachers are MATA as a bargaining unit, our Mount Arrowsmith Teachers Association. Other professionals are the exempt staff. Substitutes / replacements are, I tend to use interchangeably. And then benefits are benefits, and we'll talk more on that a little bit later. And we'll talk more on the substitutes / replacement costs. And then ultimately supplies and services are what's remains. And so you can see that, again, slightly less being spent on supplies and services as I spoke to the pressures or the pressures that come with these targeted funding. It doesn't necessarily include additional services for supplies and our service costs, which includes utilities and that nature. So by and large, our budget is overwhelmingly people-based, staffing costs, whether it's tied to wages and salaries or it's tied to benefits. Historically, we spend about 87% on salaries and benefits. Today, it's in the same range. Supplies and services are a little bit smaller share, and hence why oftentimes the fiscal adjustments are needed to come from that in the past. And now we're having to go against staffing generally now. Within the operating budget, teaching salaries are about 31% versus 37% in the prior years. Again, adding staff supported through special purpose funds has basically raised this a little bit. Benefits 17%, historically 16%, reflecting cost escalations. Support staff and services follow along, but are generally being squeezed. Bottom line, nearly 9 out of every $10 is going to compensation. Cost pressures for replacement and benefits are continuing to pressure the budget beyond what we're often funded at. Consistently, we're looking for efficiencies and value for money as we protect the classroom delivery.
Onward.
Carrying on. So staffing over time, and again, so looking at our three basic employee groups, we've got teachers, classroom teachers, counselors, librarians, speech and language, learning support, and school psychologists. Forgive me if I don't include everyone, but just trying to give you a lens. Support staff, educational assistants, school meals workers, childcare providers, responsible adults, support workers, whether they're Indigenous ed or they are child and youth care workers. We've got clerical staff, we've got library clerks, we've got bus drivers, we've got custodials, we've got trades of a variety. And so within that trades, we've got carpenters, we've got electricians, we've got HVAC specialists, and then we've got grounds on top of that. And so again, that's our support staff. They pick up, again, you can see that they run the gambit of picking up kids, dropping them off to delivery of programs inside the schools. Administration, as you would expect, includes principals and vice principals. It includes district leadership, superintendent, secretary, treasurer, associate superintendent, directors of instruction are included in that. We've got directors of human resources, director of, I shouldn't put a plural to that, director of operations. We've got other exempt staff within that. We've got district managers, and then we've got associated positions that have come with funding. And so the ebbs and flows of administration, particularly when it comes to the ICY, which is a most recent position placed within administration, integrated child and youth coordinator. Social worker is within the last 5 years. The homestays has been able to grow somewhat. Sorry, the homestay coordinator has able to grow a little bit over the last 10 years as the international program has grown. And so I'm trying to, in effect, I'm trying to contextualize the administration changes over the years. No different than teaching and support staff. They changed with the funding that's available. They change with the priorities that have been established through the budget and strategic planning. So there is an ebb and flow in all of these areas, but recognizing that classroom teachers is by far the largest complement of staff. Pointing to a couple of items on here, you can see that teachers increased between 17-18 and 18-19. Primarily driven by the classroom enhancement funds. And it's a fund that's related to the Supreme Court decision that rolled back some legislative adjustments to collective agreements. So they were reestablished, class size and composition was reestablished. And so funding was made available to hire more teachers effectively, and additional funding for educational assistance, recognizing that with more teachers, there might be more need for associated supports in the classroom. So that's what you're seeing happening in those years. ramped up between 257 to 272 to 277. Again, knowing that the money didn't come to us in the form of operating grant, but it did come to us in the form of special purpose funds. Likewise, support staff over the course of time. The food program comes with a need for support staff. We call them school meal workers. Our childcare fundings, as we take on more of the childcare programming, includes additional supports for responsible adults, for the childcare assists. Over COVID, for example, we added more custodials into the system. And again, it's really just recognizing that we address these things over the course of time as funding and priority shifts. Still good?
Yep.
And I've kind of spoken to this a little bit, but again, this is teachers are sometimes self-evident in terms of what they do, what they deliver, but support staff, I just want to hone in on how their categories change over the time. So EAs, educational assistants, I think we all recognize who they are, but embedded in that number, of course, is any of the support staff that are supporting kids one-on-one or in that kind of a setting, to offering some programming. So embedded in that EA number is the food program workers, it's the childcare workers, it includes the youth and youth care workers. So that number clearly ebbs and flows as the funding is supportable and as the programs change. Clerical and library, which is the red line, is truly clericals, and again they range the whole gambit of clerical workers that are working, secretarial supports that are in the schools, that are in the counseling offices, that are in administrative offices, that are in HR offices. They deliver payroll, they deliver other supports in other areas, administrative support, dispatch support, that kind of nature. Operations and maintenance, O&M, that's our complement of staff that includes our custodials, it includes our trades, it includes, well, I guess that's it. I'll leave it at that. Transportation is bus driver and all the administrative supports that they have. We've got a dispatcher and we've got an clerical support that supports that department. I'm just going to give I'm actually encouraging questions because it'll give me a chance to drink some water. I'm just going to break for a sec.
Unfortunately, this is the stuff that's already with us and we're living with. And now what we're anticipating, of course, is okay, what's next and how do we deal with the next year? But all valuable context, Ron, to stage the discussion. Thank
Absolutely. Yes, so going forward, planning considerations, as Chair Flynn alluded to. So one of the biggest pressures that I've talked about in the past, if you've sat in on this budget discussions the past 5 years effectively, is the replacement costs, substitutes. And so it's the TTOCs that are replacing teachers, is the support staff. So we oftentimes have itinerant staff going in to replace clerical, to replace custodians, to replace our bus drivers. Particularly those areas that we would generally replace on the first day. And so the blue is TTOC, the red is obviously supports and those that are supporting the CUPE collective bargaining unit. So over the course of time, 13, 14, you can see we were sitting around 1.3, ebbs and flows, 1.3 in 16, 17, 1.6 in 17, 18, 1.8. During COVID in the year 2019, 2020, it dropped significantly, because we weren't operating for 6 weeks. And when we did come back, it was on a delayed approach. I think at that point we were doing alternate days for secondary, etc. So there truly was in that first year a reduced service level and therefore a reduced replacement cost. After that, when we opened up gangbusters in 2020, 2021, you can see the replacement costs was fairly normal, and then it started increasing respectively in the years after that, to the point of 2023-24 when we hit kind of that 2.5 threshold. And we're often questioned in terms of when we show this representation of what about the increasing wage rates that occurred during that same time, and what about the increasing staffing that occurred during that same time? How does that impact the aggregate, the 1.5 going up? So what I've tried to do structurally on this is show the replacement costs against the wages that we're paying. And so regardless of how many staff we have, or the number of assignments, or the value of that assignment, i.e. increasing wage rates, the percentage of wage kind of reflects the drawdown for replacements. And so that's really the takeaway here, is that the replacement costs as a percentage of wages continues to creep up. When it was 5.3, 4.9, and now that it's 6.6, 6.2, that has a direct implication on the value that's being that's straining the budget. And so you could argue that there's an additional $1 million in that 1.6% that's being taken out of the budget to pay for the replacement costs. So you're going to kind of see that alignment when I show the benefit sides too, to try to sort of represent the actual aggregate costs aren't the issue. It's the portion of those aggregated costs that are pressuring the budgets. Moving forward.
Yep.
So this is the representation of taking money out of, or taking the dollar value out of the equation, looking at the number of sick day usage against the FTE. And so the takeaway is sick day usage for all employee groups has continued to increase after the pandemic. You can see it was fairly flat between 2011 through to about 2017 in all categories. It started to escalate before the pandemic, and again, that's just how it occurred. At the pandemic, and again, this is where you're seeing all of these declined, except for administration, but certainly in teachers and support staff, which is the bulk of our costs, declined during those years of pandemic. And then when we opened up after the pandemic, the usage increased. And again, this is expressed in terms of not only did the occurrences of sick days, but also the length of the time off. And it really isn't just us. This is why I'm showing you in that blue area, the representation that was shared with BCPC at a presentation on the K-12 public education. And so just walking ourselves across, you can see the teachers in our school districts, 7.1, 8.1, 7.7, started to rise to 8.2 after pandemic, 11.0, 10.8, 11.7, 11.9. Stacking that against the BC experience, you can see that the BC experience for teachers, 9.5, started to rise to 11.9, 11.3, 11.2. Same experience that and again, you could overlay this with probably the globally, nationally, et cetera, that after the pandemic, we've become more conscious of the effect that our health has on other people. So we're staying home more often, and we're staying home longer so that we can recover from whatever it is that's ailing us. And that's not to say that we don't need to, but again, it's a pressure that the budget has to bear. Likewise, we look at support staff over the course of time. In our district, 9.5 days per year, 10.6 days per year. Started to escalate, 13.4, 13.8, stabilized around this 13 value, up 3 days a week, or 3 days a year effectively from before pandemic. Likewise, we're not alone here, 9.5 for support staff provincially, 10.4, 10.5, 10.4. Management, administration is not immune to this. You're seeing that generally speaking, that green bar is going up over the course of time as administrators are taking more time off for sickness. Note in many cases, and again, this is the usage. This isn't necessarily the replacement costs. Oftentimes, some of the support staff don't get replaced. Some of the teachers don't get replaced if they're in non-enrolling positions. And likewise, management generally doesn't get replaced when they stay home for sicknesses. We good?
Onward, yep. Onward.
Onward.
Yeah.
So this is just a point in time, but again, it's just recognizing that there is a continuation of the sick leaves. What you're looking at here is the sick days used by teachers from between September and January, the last draw date that I drew the data. You can see that over the course of time, it's been escalating at this point in time, again, pointing to 2021 as the one that's the anomaly because that was the COVID year. And then the trend thereafter has escalated. Part of this trend reduction is because of the decreases in FTE that we took out of the system basically starting September. So we would expect a drawdown or a reduced usage up to this point because it's explainable because of that FTE reduction. Same thing happening in support staff. So year to date for them is July to January because we have support staff that work over the summer months, maintenance, custodial, grounds. So generally speaking, over the course of time, it's been fairly level with that escalation with COVID kind of thing. And so what you're seeing, generally speaking, is an increase of usage. We express it in terms of sick hours, but point in time for January, it's leveling off. But again, there's some of that reduction is because we have less staff in the system that are using sick days or sick hours.
I think we have a question from Barry. Barry.
Barry.
Thank you. So Ron, I was just curious, what do you have an average figure for the students and what their sick days are per year? Say high school.
I don't. Superintendent Jory has spoken to this a few times, and I'll open up to him.
Apologies, my camera's not working. I don't have an average. We haven't done a calculation that looks like this for comparison's sake. No. As I mentioned in the last board meeting, and showed a chart, we are trending up this year, apparently, but I don't have it in terms like this.
I was just curious. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, next slide.
Thank you. And thank you for that question so I could get a drink. Benefit pressures. So benefits, again, I'm expressing it in terms of as a percentage of salaries to kind of get an understanding that it's not just the magnitude of the increases, but it's the percentage that's impacting the budget. And within benefits, there's a few things going on. Benefits are made up of pension, employer costs. It's made up of WorkSafe BC, employer costs, and it's made up of the bargain increases through extended health and dental coverage. And so over the course of time, between 13-14 through to about, I'll say 2018-2019, it was fairly static. We did increase our staffing complement during that period, as going back to SEF, where the teacher staffing complement increased during that time, but it had a negligible impact on the benefit costs. And so there was a few things happening during that period. Benefits, the pension portion, the employer's portion of pension benefits went down during a period of time because the funded program or the pension funds were fully funded, and so they were able to pass on some of those savings on to the employer as well as the employees. So that mitigated some of the escalations in other benefit costs. Likewise, during that period, WorkSafe, we were tied to a broader sector. We were tied to the educational sector in general, so post-secondary, as well as school districts, public sector, public education, were tied together. In about that period, we were separated, and so we became our own sector or division, as it were. And because of that, we lost some of the gains that we would have had with post-secondary. There's more incidences, generally speaking, per employee group within the public school sector, because of oftentimes the higher risk for students, and so we're a little bit more religious on the safety, or trying to be more rigorous in the safety aspects. Long story short, there was an impact on the WorkSafe component and how much was passed on to the employer at that time. So after COVID, the biggest driver in our benefits was generally, not necessarily directly related to the pandemic, but that's when the bargaining also occurred. And so bargaining added value to the benefits, which obviously added value to the benefit costs. Likewise, after COVID, because more people were seeking medical advice and seeking going to the doctor a little bit more, getting prescriptions. It escalated our benefit usage, therefore impacting our benefit costs. And likewise, what you also saw was escalation of medical costs in general. So prescription costs have been escalating due to the supply drivers. Doctors and dentists increased their rates based on recent conditions, and that's being passed on to the providers, which in turn gets passed on to we as the benefit consumers, if you want, and the employers. So naturally that cost burden is passed on to employers, and you're seeing effectively in 2019, 2020, that 8.9 represented about 25.8% against salaries. In that time, it's increased by 2.5%, which is a huge increase against the salaries. And so regardless of more staffing in the system and higher staffing costs in the system, the burden of the benefits is greater on the budget. And so we have less money for other things. And so really that's the central point here, is that as these two areas escalate, it means less money for other things. It crowds out supplies and services. It crowds out our ability to staff. It crowds out our ability to make other choices that we might not have otherwise made. Okay.
Yep.
So looking at,
Projections.
what's that?
Projections.
Projections. So enrollment projections. So as we look at the projections for 26-27, one of the areas that we gain insight from is through Berger. Berger, I've kind of got a commentary down here. Berger Demographics Consultants, using historical information, current trends, Statistics Canada, they utilize it for migration and birth rates. They project out the enrollments out 15 years. And so we look at their next year's projections to start visualizing what we think it should be or will be. We layer on top of that our local knowledge and information that we glean from conversation with principals, what we see in terms of building permits, in terms of building around us, how that will impact certain areas, certain catchments, and layer in, again, this local knowledge to try to tease out the enrollment. So what you're seeing, obviously, with over time is As I talked to a little bit before, the enrollment declined from a period of about 2010 to about 2014. During that period, the board made some difficult decisions and they closed some schools to accommodate the reduced needs and therefore reducing the capacity in the school district. About 2014 on, we've actually seen, and this is not just in our own district, but provincially, there's been an increase provincially in enrollment, and we've felt a little bit of it over the course of 2015 through 2020. We kind of plateaued around that area. It fell a little bit as we responded after COVID. Kids came back into the system. So we got a little bit of a bump in it in 22, 23. Since then, though, our enrollment has been declining, and this is really just the demographics of our community. If we look around, the residential housing going up, it's cost prohibitive for families somewhat, and so what you're seeing is our population is aging out of the school system. And therefore we're not seeing the kids coming in, and that is representative in our kindergarten numbers. You can see in 23-24 our kindergarten was sitting at around 263. In September 24, 248. In September 2025, 226. So as we go to the next screen in a moment, I'll show you how we're kind of trying to determine our own local knowledge against what Bergar is indicating, but recognizing that we're ultimately trying to get a best estimate that will go in and base it and will for the March grant that gets announced, it will be representative of the projected enrollment that we anticipate.
Onward.
Okay, so the key lens, there's two things that obviously form the key lens to extrapolating our projections. So we talk about the difference between our graduating grade 12s and our incoming grade Ks, and we look at the next net migration within each cohort. So looking at one, the differential between our graduating class of 323 and 248 is about 75. And so we know full well that our cohorts will decline, or our net migrations, or our cohort differential will be declining by at least 75 in that year. We gained in that year about 47 kids. And so this is the differential between how the kindergartens translated to the following year's grade 1 cohort. The 275 became 271. We lost 4 kids, plus or minus. 321 converted to 324, 318 converted to 326. The sum of all of that equated to 47. And so in the year 24-25 was the first year we lost enrollment. And again, because we lost 75 at the graduation versus kindergarten, and we only recovered 47 of them in the cohort levels. The following year, so this is setting up September 25, what happened? So we had a net loss due to graduations of 354. We gained 226 in kindergarten. That set up 128 net loss. We only recovered 112 within the cohort retention. So 277 to 278. 271 became 284. Again, there's always ebbs and flows in the cohort as families come and go within our community. And so we gained back 112, but it wasn't enough to offset that net loss in that K-12 offset. So we ultimately lost 16. As our graduating class, and that's what you're seeing here, the graduating class is peaking this year. Next year's graduating class won't be as big, but we'll see what comes of it. But a point being, we're effectively losing this component, or 415. If Bergar's projection holds, we'll only lose 165. If, as we anticipate that our projections are going to be slightly less to Beauregard's and we only gain 235, then the net loss is 180. That red bar is yet to be determined. And again, so it will come with conversations that Associate Superintendent Wilson will have with the schools, with the administrators. I'll tease out the numbers that come because we're in the middle of our second count that corresponds to online learning, but it also allows us to look at where we are today in our enrollments from where we were in September. So assuming that we gain kids from September to now, that'll help us understand what we think this net migration of what we have in the system for kindergarten, how that'll migrate into September's grade ones, etc. So that red bar is yet to be determined, but you get a sense of that plus or minus that I'm talking about when I say 60 to 80 net loss. So it could be anywhere in that. We'll firm up those numbers in the next couple of days as we look at, like I said, as we look at our second count, which looks at our enrollment as of this week, as well as the conversations we have, and that'll tease out sort of how we feel in terms of what the projections will be for September, so that we can line up our staffing accordingly. Makes sense?
Yeah, I see no questions. Go forward. Oh,
Moving
sorry.
forward.
Felicia, sorry. Felicia, go for it.
Okay, this might be too vague of a question. Is there a rough number? Like, so say for instance, we say there's a difference of 50 students, like in the negative. Do you have numbers on, like, say there's 50 in the negative, that 40 of them are still local but are doing homeschooling, or 40 of them like left the district completely? Is there any numbers to show like where these numbers are, if it's just because families have actually gone, or if they're still in the area but doing
In the
homeschool,
community.
or now going to another school but still living in our community?
We have information on the homeschoolers. We have, so any family that is homeschooling should be registering with our local schools. And so in September, they register, we count them as a child that we touch base with. We don't get funding necessarily directly for them, but it gives us the ability to track some of these children that are being homeschooled. Over the course of time, because different jurisdictions are counting at the same time as we are, so other school districts have the same deadline or the target date of September 30th. So other jurisdictions, other public school entities, including independent schools, are doing the same thing. And so we sometimes glean some information of why that a child within our community has gone to another jurisdiction, whether it be private school or an independent school, or has gone to another school district, because they'll let our school know to take them off the rolls so that they can claim them for funding. But we can't do any snapshots of where are our community kids landing currently. We only know what kids are taking programming from us, whether it's through homeschooling or through the programs that we offer, alternate, online, and regular programming. If that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Once they're extracted from the education, the BC ESIS program, they don't become part of our data anymore. They're either at an independent school or another school district.
Yeah. And in fact, we have to, I mean, by the very nature, but we have to remove them so that the other district can claim them. And so they do fall off our rolls, which is clearly what we're trying to get to come September. It's only those that are registered in our school district that we claim services for. And that's what the funding is attributed to.
Okay, no further questions, and onward then, Ron.
So other areas that we factor into our budget planning, and so from the multi-year financial plan, this is an extract, and so it really articulates the nature of a 3 to 4 year planning cycle that districts not only are asked now to do, but is just good good
Planning.
governance, as it were, good planning in order for us to look out ahead on what some of these other costs are that we need to inject into our planning cycle. So I use the example of local capital, which are funds provided within the two local school boards within their authority to spend on capital items. The funds can come from land and building sales, or they can come from what we call appropriating an operating surplus and moving funds from operating dollars into the local capital so that we can spend on these unfunded capital purchases. So case in point, there's what you're seeing is past spend. So we use some of our local capital to buy a 1-year infusion for our white fleet. White fleet is not funded through capital dollars. Our white fleet is defined by those white vans, the white trucks that drive around, moving our trades to school, moving our custodial staff school to school. The yellow buses, on the other hand, or the yellow fleet, are funded through a capital program. And so, yes, most of our vehicles are funded through provincial funds, but not all of them. We have to find funds to replace our white fleet. Likewise, we have to find funds outside of the capital program to fund copier replacement, to refresh our tech cycle, whether it's servers, whether it's laptops, whether it's conduit in the walls. Oftentimes that comes from finding additional dollars that are outside the ministerial planning funds. The bus route software, great investment, but it's got to it's got to be funded through these other sources. And so that's what we've done in the past with our local capital that we had at our disposal. Going forward, a couple of items that came up in that planning cycle: white fleet replacement. We need to pursue that or continue to pursue that. Recognizing that $100,000 in 1 year over what you're looking at in a 4-year cycle doesn't replace very many of our vans. So we have to continue to replenish that. The copier replacement, if we did everything together, it would be about 200,000, 250,000. And it's just really making sure that we either have the funds to do it in a single year or plan accordingly based on putting a little bit of money in the budget that each year to fill the bucket that needs to be replaced with time. Likewise, the IT refresh program, numbers in there, 75,000, 100,000. Really, it's just addressing the ongoing needs in the tech department. That's obviously servicing the kids in the schools, the school programs. So on top of that, obviously, we can look at as we build these local capital funds, we look at it two streams. We can either find the money once every 5 years, or we can plan on it more expeditiously and put aside maybe a little bit of money each of those 5 years. So case in point, I use the example of we can put $100,000 once every 5 years into the laptop replacement, or we can put $20,000 a year for 5 years to replenish the cycle on an ongoing basis. How we do it is really about having that budget conversation of how much are we willing to burden the next year's budget with each of these planning cycles. So it really is about infusing into the conversation the needs for some of these things that don't otherwise get addressed through, like I said, capital funding, through special purpose funding, or ongoing operating dollars. We have to infuse that into our cycle of planning. Particularly because these funds aren't necessarily funded by any other source. One of the sources of funding that was raised in our stakeholder, in our partner group, was the annual facility grant. And that's an annual refresh of capital money, and it comes to us in a couple of forms. It comes to us in a little bit in special purpose funds and a little bit in capital funding. It's about 1.4 though, but what it tries to address is the routine nature of us maintaining our buildings, Oftentimes, we don't get funding to change out bathroom faucets. We don't get funding necessarily to change out water, drinking fountains. We don't get funding to clean our air duct systems. We don't get funding through capital to do some of these routine maintenance programs. And so the AFG, this annual facility grant, is intended for school districts to share the burden of some of these smaller targeted routine maintenance funds and programming. And it's also very prescriptive in terms of how we spend it. So I used the example earlier today that we can't use the AFG funding to build new classrooms. We can't use the AFG funding to buy a bus. We can't use the AFG funding to create an addition, or in some cases, school districts look to it for portable replacements, but they're not allowed to do that because that's increasing the floor space of a school by extension. So the AFG has very prescribed rules that we basically use the funding for. And again, 1.5 is not even nearly enough that we need on an ongoing basis, but it is money that we can use that we don't have to dip into our operating fund for. But again, this is the legacy of when we know that our different revenue streams, when we know our different conditions that are placed in these funding sources, we can align our budget planning accordingly. I'm going to stop there for a moment because we're kind of going into the wrap up, just so folks know. But if there's any questions on these previous ones, please don't hesitate to interrupt.
Seeing none, let's march on to the assumptions, austerity, and you've got a little drink of water.
Get my drink of water and so what's on our radar from what we've heard, what we're kind of gleaning from information coming from ministerial narratives, provincial communications that we get. So I kind of look at January 2025, when we had the mandate letters that we could review that were given to the new cabinet that was appointed with the new government. So within the mandate letter for Minister Honorable Lisa Bear, Minister of Education and Childcare. So the language allowed us to sort of read between the lines to know where they were potentially seeing some additional funding. So the language that they use was obviously programs and initiatives, reviewing of them, program initiatives to ensure the programs remain relevant, are efficient, and improve the experience of those who access childcare and educational services. So that leads us into, obviously, childcare was obviously a priority, as we know. And so that's what we saw is they wanted to accelerate the delivery of new and expanded schools, improve access to affordable childcare. I think there was language in there at the time about food programs. And so there was corresponding money coming to us through the Feeding Futures funds. Nationally, the National Food Program was starting to get traction. And so that we also saw some additional funding through that program, which was federally sponsored. There was language that I've taken out this year because it seems to have gone away a little bit, was the priority to put additional educational assistance in the classrooms. We really haven't seen much of that priority. So I've taken it out, recognizing that it's maybe fallen off for now, and it may come back and resonate in future years as they right-size their budget, their provincial budget. Likewise, there was just a language around work to increase Indigenous grad rates, and our superintendent, Jory, has spoken to that at board meetings and education meetings in terms of how our local school district is supporting that increase in rates and is doing a good job doing so. So fast forward 1 year, January 2026, we don't necessarily have any mandate letters to read, but we will have a throne speech I think it's been delayed a couple of days, but it's anticipated to come out next week. That sets the budget parameters that gets released 2 weeks after that. And then come mid-March, each provincial ministry gets their value. And so we as a school district will learn how much money is coming to our local school district when the announcements come out mid-March. But that's sort of the lens that we usually look to. The throne speech is generally spoken to the priorities of government. We expect it to have a lot of words like austerity, cost cutting, belt tightening, all of these things that we recognize that the provincial government is going to, recognizing that they've been pressured by the forest fires in the fall. They've been pressured to reduce a couple of revenue streams. One of them was the tax on vacant houses. They reduced that. They've reduced something else that they've reduced that I can't recall what it is because of the federal mandate. But again, these are revenue streams that are drying up for the government, that is putting pressure apart from the cost side that are also escalating. We've heard commentary from the Capital Branch, Minister of Infrastructure, that funds the major and minor works. Excuse me for a moment.
I could fill in for a second here on the first note in Ron saying that the bargaining mandate, bargaining is still underway with our teachers and to come with our QP workers, and with the BCGEU strike, the mandate shifted. And so this mandate is now increased to 4 years, and corresponding to that will be increased wages and benefit costs, to which we hope will then translate into core funding, FTE funding, accordingly. Back to you on Capital Branch.
Awesome. Good handoff. Thank you very much. So embedded obviously in that, recognizing that maybe the ministry has less money to fund programming, one of the first things they tend to go to are the exempt staff. In past years, prior to the most recent collective agreement, and now this program, when the general wage increases were fairly substantial, the ministry thankfully funded some of the exempt staff increases, so it wasn't burdening the operating grant. Prior to that, they hadn't, but prior to that, the wage increases were much more smaller. So we've kind of got, I wouldn't say complacent, but we've certainly relaxed in terms of the approach for funding these increases. And so there may not be funding for this exempt staff increases, which will further impact our operating funding and pressure the budget that we're having this conversation about. So yet to be determined, but again, there is some foreshadowing with the employer council, the public sector employer council, putting the burden back to local budgets. Also not known at this time are some of the other funding streams that we have for programming. Last year, it was made known that the Seamless Daycare funds that we've received, about 55,000, Seamless Daycare program will be discontinued. Mental health funds were announced to be discontinued as of September 2026. Feeding Futures is sustained for another 3 and potentially 6 years. The National Food Program, I believe, is sustained for another 3, possibly 6 years. The other special purpose funds continue on as best we know, and this includes those community funds, learning improvement funds, classroom enhancement funds, French funds, BCT, which funds one of our or 2 of our bus routes for First Nations students. They are remaining in place, but again, we just don't know what some of the other early learning programs will be. Some have been announced as reduced, or some were finished as of September 25. Some might be reduced as of September 2026. So not known at this time. We're just cautious on how we approach our budget accordingly. So recap, enrollment projections yet to be determined, but will be based on and will embed obviously the staffing needs, will be based on a declining enrollment. We'll have more information on that at the end of this week, and we'll roll that out into our budget planning as we continue the cycle after our budget and our funding announcement comes in. Things that we need to consider are the pressures placed on our budget because of replacement and benefit costs, some of the local capital initiatives that we've talked about, how that will be impacting our conversations for operating funds. And then likewise, that we recognize that there are going to be priorities placed on the budget due to senior management asks or wishes. Planning committees will come forward with some of their asks, and other partner groups may come forward with their asks in terms of, could we direct funding into this area? Could we direct funding into that area? So again, all that stuff needs to be continued. We're just starting the process in terms of what we think we know. There's some things that we are still waiting to know further on that will be included in the wrap up. So next steps, and this way I can take it off my share screening and we can open it up a little bit more. Obviously, we're having our February conversations with board partners public. The March 12th funding announcement that will include what we think our projections are, will give us additional information in terms of, are there other funds for other things, or are they diminishing funds for some of the programs that we've tended to rely on. We'll have further discussions in April and May with our partners. We could do, and again, this is these numbers, these dates can change, but in the past we've had May, the week preceding the board deliberations, we have a special board meeting for the public so that they can hear the context of what we've talked about, knowing that we could, between April and June, we could pass a budget, but recognizing that we have to at least pass the budget by June 30th. It has to be approved and submitted to the ministry. So we've got some time after that that we'll continue to have these dialogues as we roll the information out. What I didn't include on here at this point is we do have a budget survey out, went live last week. It's available off our website within the finance and on the first page. That will also embed conversation that will be beyond obviously the conversations we have with these presentations. But again, we'll bring those survey results forward with the next iteration of planning. I will stop sharing. I will take a drink and you can talk and take questions.
Thanks very much, Ron. Always comprehensive and full of tons of info, which is for folks that are new to the process, sometimes hard to understand, but we will have other opportunities to do so. This is the opportunity for this evening for questions, and Ray already gave us his head up. He had 5 questions, so go for it, Ray.
Hello, and thank you, Ron, for the presentation. I can't imagine what 75 minutes on a Teams presentation with 0 visual feedback must be like. And thank you, everyone, for having me here today. I'm here tonight from the House of the Foot of Mount Arrowsmith and the unceded territory of the Qualicum First Nations. And I can't help but feel it's time to move beyond the new COVID norms and begin gathering in person again. I feel being together face to face would help us feel more connected in these discussions and strengthen our relationships with one another, and maybe make it easier on Ron too. I do have a few questions tonight, but they don't need to all be in order. And I'll just open up with this first question and we can go from there. So my first question would be for us in SD 69, with the continued decrease in enrollment and how costs are rising faster than the provincial funding, how much of the current budget shortfall is planned to be covered from cutting direct student services versus cutting administrative overhead?
I think it's too early to tell on that one because we don't see the envelope of the funding that's been provided for government to understand that. We also are in process of guiding the classroom assessments and needs in the classrooms as we go along at the same time. So I don't think we can't conclusively answer that question at this point. It's too early in the process.
And that's
Thanks,
just,
Steve.
and that's
Yeah,
just,
thank you very much. And I'm actually kind of like, will staff be recommending an increase to this year's budget on Schedule 2B under other professionals? I guess is a more specific question.
so I'll interject before, that's
Okay.
all part of the balancing of the budget. I think Chair Flynn did recognize the fact that we're not there yet. We don't know. We don't know our revenue stream at this point. We're just trying to understand the implications on our budget. But that truly is the balancing act that the board has to, with staff support, that has to make the decision on, yet to be determined, Ray.
Okay, so staff is not certain if they'll recommend a increase on Schedule 2B under
No.
other professionals at this point.
Way too premature.
Okay.
I'll step into one more question, Ray, and then I've got Carol Kellogg, trustee to the board, and then we can come back to you with some more.
Sure.
But do you want to jump into another one?
Yeah. Okay, well, I guess another question I might have is, with the budget showing a continued drawdown of operating surplus, what is the board's, like the SD 69 trustees board, long-term plan to address the structural deficit once this surplus is exhausted?
So structural deficit means it implies a use of surplus to balance your budget.
Mhm.
We are not doing that. So we currently are in a balanced budget state. The structural deficit is only if you're relying on surpluses to balance your budget. And we're not doing that. And so which is why we had such a large funding gap last year, was because we didn't want to dip in any further to surpluses to balance the budget. And so we needed to get it from current funding sources. As you've heard tonight, clearly there are pressures in our budget. Once we know our funding, then we can address what is that gap that needs to be addressed through expenditure reductions, whether it comes from surpluses, whether it comes from services and supplies, or whether it comes from implied staffing, which is about 90% of our budget, is yet to be determined. But again, we don't have a structural deficit. We're having to ride that line though.
Thank you.
And we have a surplus policy that we like to hold to, which is what we have as a containment of that within policy. Just quickly move Ray off you to trustee Kellogg.
Yeah, I just had more of a comment because I want folks to know that at this budget setting, my priority as a trustee is keeping students in the classroom at the center of our discussions. The greatest impact on student success comes from people who support them every day. I believe funding should prioritize teachers and educational assistants, as this directly supports students' learning and well-being, and it aligns with our strategic plan. So I just want people to know that this budget, I will be focusing in on that. And I understand the enrollment challenges, and I'm really interested in the survey. So I'm hoping that people will get that survey filled out and sent into the board, because it is shared with trustees, and that gives us an idea of what the priorities are of the community.
Thanks, trustee Kellogg. Seeing no further hands from others, I'll go back to Ray. Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, and I do have a follow-up question, maybe for the comment from trustee Kellogg or others. Just regarding the focus on students, how is the district ensuring that inclusion remains effective when educational hours are being held back or reduced?
We don't, educational hours of whom? What?
Oh, I mean, EA hours, educational assistant hours. Sorry. Yeah.
well, we don't know that yet for this year, so I think
Well-
inclusion, I think trustee Young can speak to her priorities possibly.
Sure.
Of inclusion, because yes, it has a keen focus for many of the trustees. Trustee Young, do you wish to weigh in or not so? Okay, I don't think your comments, Ray, are lost on us on that.
Okay.
on that concept.
I
Okay, Yeah.
I've found my I found my
I think your
my
your
voice.
unmute button.
I found my unmute button. Yeah, I mean, my priorities, I have laid them out to the board, and I laid them out at the partners meeting today. Inclusion number one. Number two, I want to see our fine arts and applied skills programs saved, and in both the elementary and the secondary system. And the third thing is really, it's more about capital, but I would like to see a long-term vision for our food programs. So over, over the next 10 years, what we want our food programs to look like. And then we can talk about how to get there. So, I mean, those are my priorities. That's what I will be pushing for. And so be it. And hopefully I won't have to say that again. Okay, thanks very much.
Hey, thanks, Elaine, for chiming in. Didn't mean to put you on the spot, but you had talked about it. Trustee Kellogg, would you have further comment or your hands
Yeah,
just still up?
I just wanted to say, Ray, for your information, and I'm hoping that the provincial government comes through with it. But when we met with Minister Bear, she did say that the increase of educational assistance is still on the table. So I'm hoping when that budget comes down from them that there is some more money that's going to go into educational assistance.
And
Right.
yeah, well, this, it's been kind of a recurring theme over the last few years, cutting EA hours. And I just, perhaps maybe later in the budget, maybe later in this year, we could hear back from the board how they expect to just keep up with the inclusion when the E hours are being cut back. Like if we're going to cut E hours back, can we please have some sort of a response how we can maintain the same? I'm not sure how to word it. I'm sorry.
The supports.
The same supports. Yeah.
And I'm Associate Superintendent Wilson, I think, was going to weigh in, but just to observe that there's different ways to supplying supports for kids in the classrooms. Sometimes it's done through teachers, in-classroom teachers. Sometimes it's done through non-enrolling teachers. Sometimes it's done through EAs. Sometimes it's done through support workers. So it's not just necessarily, and again, I'm speaking from somebody embedded that has seen how that balance needs to be considered, because there's different ways of delivering services for these kids. It's not just about educational assistance, although that is one way.
Ms. Wilson, do you wish to add comments?
I think you spoke about it earlier today, Chair Flynn, around the process that we're currently about to embark on, which is to look at all of our schools and talk about who our students are and what supports are needed. Secretary Treasurer Amos articulated that it's not always about just the support staff, but it's that support team, which consists of speech and language pathologists, learning support teachers, counselors. And this has been a board in for the past number of years. It's always spent time FTE counselors, and always been above what the provincial average or the provincial requirement has been. And the same goes to the learning support staff. We have professional staff, and I know that our neighboring districts are quite envious about the amount of support time that we put into our speech and language pathologists, knowing that that early intervention is so crucial. So it is that team that is inclusive of child and youth care workers, educational assistants, as well as the teaching or professional staff.
Okay, Ray, we've only got about 5 minutes left on our slate tonight.
Okay.
I'd like to have
Well-
others chime in if they wish, but I don't see any hands, so I'll give you one more shot at it. And
Sure.
then
I thought
please
the
do
meeting
write
was
it
6
down.
to 8. Is the
No,
meeting not
it's
6
from
to 8
6
o'clock?
No, 6 to 7:30.
Oh. Well, I hope the revision of board policy 302 does not affect the volunteers in the classroom. And I know last year, everyone remembers us getting an email about volunteers in the classroom, how there was complaints. But I'd really like to get back for the last 5 minutes here, or if I could have a bit more. I guess my last question might be, since the last ministry compliance audit regarding the special education enrollment claims, what specific administration changes have been made to ensure that our district doesn't lose, well, not lose further funding, but I guess like plan with non-existing funding during, like, we planned for this funding, but then there was documentation errors. And I know during the audit that some students were undesignated because the district could not prove parental consultation. And I'm just kind of wondering if they couldn't get parental consultation, how, like, does that, like, we have a strategic plan with inclusion goals and we can't communicate with parents, and that funding is going into our budget. And then we're planning with that money, but we're learning after that money isn't allowed because of documentation errors. And the audit really identified where students were reclassified because of insufficient documentation and medical assessments and missing IEP goals. And does the board acknowledge that these students still have physical and learning challenges, even though the paperwork failed to meet the ministry standards?
Ray, I'm gonna kind of say that I don't think is an appropriate discussion at this point. It involves names, people, staffing, and it's not a part of our budget at
There's
this
no names or
time.
staffing, anything involved. It's just a question,
Yeah,
like,
but
there was designations that were taken away, but do
but
we
I
acknowledge
think
they are
the
still
board is not,
designated?
the board is not aware of the fine point of the audit that you're claiming. So I don't think we're at this time able to answer that question. I think you stated it. It's out there. Audit procedures and audit consequences have many ramifications, sometimes due to the view of the auditors of the day that take these very seriously. And then they make the consequences of districts to comply to. But I don't know is how it works out in the end when you're saying that resources and activities for inclusion and supports for students are then removed. So I will take that question, take it to a sidebar for hopefully some more answers for you. And to wind up then here tonight with Trustee Austin. Do you have a question or a comment?
I just have a comment because I don't want people to feel that they don't have enough time. When I went on our website to the calendar entry for this meeting, it does say 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And there may be some people on that do have questions and feel like they were told that time is short. So assuming that Teams doesn't knock this meeting out exactly at 7:30, I would like to give the opportunity to go till 8 o'clock if there's further questions. Thank you.
I just was going by the 5-minute notice on my screen, Trustee Austin, so I can't tell you whether we get cut off or not, but I think also Ray has consumed enough of the time here this evening to allow others to ask questions would be fine. And I think your message, Ray, to us is loud and clear. Inclusion is a concern of yours, and that's fine. Fine point examples of the audit and things like that, I think we can handle with you off this meeting, and so that you can understand better how the audits and things like that are worked with, and then when we have results, what we have to do. Are there any other questions?
It might be better for the whole community to understand. If we're not a community working together and understanding together, we're never going to succeed together.
Nice wrap up.
Well, can I interject a little bit? So we go through financial audits annually, and and we don't always sometimes the auditor presents some wonders about. And so often, and so a case in point in terms of policy. So I don't know if you've sat in on some of the financial year-end audits and what, not audits, but statement presentations. But sometimes they bring back some wonders about how we can improve work, how we can improve services, how we can improve. And it's our job to take that away and learn from that and build from that. And I think that's ultimately what the role of like the Learning Services Department, when they have their post-audit conversations, they take away from that what they learned and build the programming and build the paperwork better. Most of the time, these audits they come, if you're looking at it with an open mind, they help you understand where you can do things better. And I think that's the lens that we tend to take when it comes to reviewing these audits. It's not to point fingers and say, you should have done this, you should have done that. If that's all you take away from an audit, you're missing the point of them. It really is about providing a better service, providing better programming, providing a better way of doing what we do. And oftentimes there's things to be learned from them.
Thanks, Ron. Yep, every audit has something to tell us. That's for sure. Trustee Young.
Yeah, I just want to respond to Ray's question because I think it's important to respond in the moment here. And quite frankly, I've been in another district. I was counseling in another district where there was an audit of files, and one of my files that I had been ordered by a superior to do a particular designation on was audited and found not to fit the criteria. And I was pretty choked because, you know, the blame fell to me as the counselor when I had been ordered to do this. Ordering doesn't happen so much in this district, thankfully. And I think when we saw the results of the audit, we did a whole lot of things that changed how our learning support teachers, our counselors, the people who write those IEPs endlessly, did their work. And I know that Associate Superintendent Wilson can speak more on this. It certainly did come to the board. We treated it with respect, and changes were made. So I think there's a presentation coming up soon on a little bit more on this. So I'm hoping that Associate Superintendent Wilson might tell you a little bit more about that process. But that's what I understand as a trustee.
To understand the process and things like that, the resources and the steps that the learning support team have put into place, I don't think is, again, I say, is not part of our conversation tonight on actual budget. So Ray, do you have any further questions?
Well, I will just wrap it up with one more question, maybe. So the 2026-2027 budget development survey is currently open. And I'm just kind of curious how exactly last year's public feedback was used to change the final budget for this year. And if the board could possibly provide maybe something like a response to budget input that shows where the community priorities from last year's budget survey were actually funded, or where there was changes in the budget to accommodate the public, just to make sure that when the survey goes out and we're all replying to it, that we can kind of feel a connection to how the budget was maybe changed for our replies or something like that.
Hopefully you attend the post-March public meetings, right? Because we have a public meeting in April that I share out the survey results. So I'm not sure if you're getting that, but clearly that's out, that goes into infusing the conversation. It's on the presentation, etc. You're not going to necessarily see a direct correlation, but it definitely infuses the conversation. So again, stay tuned. As the survey comes in, we will, or I will, report out
Yeah.
the survey. And again, it will infuse the conversation with what we heard from this group, which I think is a wonderful thing, because if you heard me talk about the survey results and why I appreciate them, is because it's often an opportunity for individuals that don't necessarily have a chance to be a part of the regular board meetings or be a part of the public presentation. It gives them a chance and an opportunity to share their views based on these, I think 12 questions we're up to. And the preponderance of the individuals filling out the survey tends to be parents, because oftentimes we hear through our bargaining units, we hear the collective voice of MATA, or we hear the collective voice of CUPE, or we hear the collective voice of DPAC. But I would certainly encourage you to stay tuned as we share out those survey results, as we've done in the past, to try to embed that into the conversation. Like I said, oftentimes there's not a, you can't say because of this we did this, but it tends to infuse the sentiment that is being heard from the parents' responses.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. I really do try quite hard to stay aware of what's going on, but it, like, you know how like life just gets busy and I can't always pay attention to everything. And I really want parents to feel like if they participate, that they're going to be heard. And I'll go back and look at last year's. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think we very much appreciate the input, but sometimes there's not a direct line to say, because it was said here by such and such or whatever, that we did such and such. It's not as clear cut as that. Trustee Austin, you did have your hand up. Now it's down. Do you wish
Yes,
to?
I did. Sorry, I don't know how it went down. I must have done that.
Yeah, no, it's quick.
I'm not sure when our next ed committee, are we having one in March? Fin and Ops.
Break. No,
If
not till April.
well, I guess it will be April then, which is sort of kind of getting a little tight on, but it's still within our time frame. Because anybody that is able to make those meetings, I would encourage them to come. That is also a great place to ask some of these questions as well. If you are not able to make it, but do have questions, you know, I think you can still email your questions so that they can be addressed at these committees. But sometimes while we're wrapping our head around budget, it's hard sometimes to wrap our heads around it if we don't perhaps understand how some of these educational components work, or the operations and maintenance pieces and things work. So those committee meetings are good places, I think, to sort of expand on all of our learning and education and how things work in our district. So if people are able to take advantage of those committee meetings, please come out and ask your questions there, and hopefully there will be some available answers, or write them in advance to have the answers prepared and ready. It's just another opportunity to have some of these questions asked and hopefully answered.
Yeah, so that would be April 14th is the Education Committee of the Whole, and the following week, Tuesday, will be Fins and Ops and Policy. So that would be the 21st.
And I will add, a commercial for the Fin and Ops for next week has budget discussion on the agenda. And so I usually try to give sort of a preliminary survey results of what we're hearing. Clearly there's going to be a dialogue on what we're hearing from the survey results. So if you want your voice captured for that Fin and Ops, put your surveys in.
Get them in now for next week.
Not that you can't put it in after that, but clearly
No.
we'll have a report out next week at the Fin and Ops.
Any further comments, Ray?
And they're recorded, Ray.
Yeah, no, just a big thank you to everyone, and I appreciate being able to ask questions and kind of voice myself and express some feelings tonight. It's really appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, a little bit beyond my flashing screen of what teams told me they were going to cut me off, so that's good. We've been able to, I believe, accommodate everyone's questions, but I will go around the circle and the boxes. Seeing no further hands, thank you very much, Secretary Treasurer Amos, for another stellar performance on the budget, setting the stage for us in our future discussions. More information to come for sure, coloring in between the lines, as I like to say, when the ministry monies are announced. Good things to look forward to, and hopefully not too much on the negative side. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this evening, and fill your survey out, get your comments in and questions, and we can hopefully have time and space before budget approval in June to accommodate everybody's thinking. Thanks, everyone.